In a way, how the US has become much more cautious about its own commitments. And all of this has created, of course, a concept called the Indo-Pacific, but it has also created a grouping called the Quad, a Quad which is US, Japan, Australia, and India. We just had a meeting last week in Hiroshima of the Quad. Prime Minister went there. He met his counterparts. And, this is illustrative of the kind of new directions we are moving. Because if you look at the Quad, the Quad is today discussing maritime collaboration. It is looking at infrastructure connectivity. It is looking at 5G. It is looking at vaccines. By the way, it also offers fellowships. So there's a lot out there. I'm sure Nivedita will share some of that with some of you who are interested. But what Quad does is it gives us more space. It gives us new partners. It gives us more comfort. And by the way, we don't call it a Quad. We have given it a somewhat musical name called I2U2. But we have a group of countries to the west of India, India, Israel, US, and UAE. And here too, there's a group of countries who meet regularly, who discuss projects. And I mentioned this to you because this is also, in a way, a new way of working. This is actually part of this redesigning that we are. And it's redesigning in the manner in which you work, the creation of platforms, the outcomes which are generated, and the relative weight of the theaters and the. But while I've spoken about these changes, I also want you people to understand that under Prime Minister Modi, we're not thinking just of tomorrow. We're not even thinking of the next year. We are thinking really beyond. And in many ways, without exaggeration, we are today laying the foundation of what is a global footprint. A global footprint where an Indian presence, you can go to the farthest corner, to Caribbean, to South America, or you can go, by the way, where I just went with the Prime Minister, the Pacific Islands. Places where sometimes no Indian Prime Minister has gone, sometimes no Indian Foreign Minister. But today, these are places where we have engagements, we have a presence, we see business, we sometimes see education. So we see Indian services out there. So what is happening with, when you become the 5th largest economy and grow, we may not be conscious of it, but slowly the ripple effect of what happens in India and by India, it goes through the entire. So you can go to very, very remote countries. I was 2 weeks ago in the Dominican Republic. Trade between India and the Dominican Republic went up from $10 million to $1 billion in the last 2 decades. And many of us are not even conscious of it. I mean, I traveled around Central America. I could get the same, medical, the sheet, the medicines, which I get in India, because today our pharmaceutical presence has really become so big. So one part of it is we are developing a global footprint. The other part of it, we are actually shaping the big global issues. Because there are, we think of international politics as something between nations, and that is true, it is. But there are some issues which are bigger than nations, which are bigger than region. Climate change. I mean, you people today are one of the few universities who actually have a dedicated program on climate action. Now, this is actually absolutely an existential issue. Now, how can it be that we are the most populous country, we are the 5th biggest economy, and we do not have a big say in shaping climate action? If that happened, we would be failing not just in our diplomacy, in actually our basic duty to our citizens and to our planet. So again, what is diplomacy itself? The effort, the subject, the manner. So you would have seen a lot of the initiatives today, the big initiatives on climate action, actually are coming out of India. And as someone who's accompanied the Prime Minister for many of these conferences, I must tell you, a lot of it is coming out of his experiences in Gujarat. So he was one of the. So the perception today, the linkages and the perception today of India in the neighborhood has changed, and nothing illustrated that more dramatically than what happened to Sri Lanka last year when they went through a very deep economic crisis. And we have actually stepped forward, in a way in which we ourselves have never done before. But what we have done for Sri Lanka is bigger than what the IMF has done for Sri Lanka. So, and if any of you have visited Sri Lanka recently, I think you will note the popular perception that has accrued from this action. Now, when we think of a neighborhood, we largely say, neighborhood is Sri Lanka, Nepal, maybe Pakistan, of course, Myanmar. That's like the limit of what it. But that wasn't always the case. I mean, if you look before 1947, if you had asked my grandfather what he thought of neighborhood, my grandfather would have said Singapore. He would have said Gulf, Aden. I don't know whether he would have gone as far as Egypt. He would have certainly said East Africa. So what we are also trying to do today is actually a bigger India, a more influential India, a more ambitious India. We are trying to expand what should be our. So we look at what are, in a way, extended neighborhoods. I mean, these could be the islands in the Indian Ocean, the Gulf. The Gulf has seen a huge change, which, if you look at a relationship like UAE or Saudi Arabia, these relationships have really undergone an enormous transformation in the last decade. Or go the other direction, Southeast Asia, and I would say even Central Asia. So in each direction, from what was a traditionally much more constricted view of our neighborhood, we have actually undertaken something much more ambitious. And in each case, of course, the region is different, so you have to do each one of those differently. But this has required, in many ways, a lot of effort, clearly by the government collectively, I would say by the country collectively, because a lot of it is driven by business, it is driven by movement of professionals, it is driven by economic benefits, challenges. Obviously, one part of that is how do we, as a big country, as a country with a great future, how do we make our decisions based on our interests, on an independence of thought and action? How do we ensure that we do not get pressurized by others? And this is a big challenge, because it is a bigger challenge in a globalized world. Because all these linkages with globalization, all of them in one way or the other, people may not say it so directly, they all become forms of pressure. So if you import oil from somewhere, that's a point of pressure. If you import food from somewhere, that is so. If you are getting medicines from somewhere. So how do you actually develop that, both the capacity and equally the mentality to speak English? And we have been through our share of challenges. We have been, you saw that when it came to buying oil from Russia. You saw that when it came to membership of this group called Quad in the Indo-Pacific, where, again, attempts were made to actually play mind games with us, saying that, no, by doing this, somewhere you are compromising your own independence, when in fact we were strengthening. It could happen, on issues like connectivity, where there may be strategic agendas of connectivity and people push you to do it, saying, everybody else is joining, so how can you stay? So pressures come in different forms. Often pressures come, as I said, through a herd mentality, through a kind of a psychological, effort at creating collective thinking. But in all of this, when I talk about big powers, of course, we have a particular challenge from China. That challenge is a very complicated challenge, but in the last 3 years, I think it has been particularly visible in the border areas. And there are clearly responses that are required, and those responses have been undertaken by the government. And a lot of it is to ensure that no attempt is made to unilaterally change the status quo in the border areas, and that we will ensure that peace and tranquility there is the basis of our relationship. That if peace and tranquility is disturbed, it cannot be that the relationship remains unaffected. Now, I have spoken about the big stage